Oh, this is like terrible. It's like have you seen that German show like Adam Meets Eve, and it's like they're naked on an island or something? This sort of means, you're now not the Adam. Like you're out the door. Okay. Feedback number 3. Humour is good, but there's nothing funny about Catholics. Noted. Noted. Feedback number 4. Chris talks a little bit too much about himself. I like this as an idea, but it's not entirely true. Because that's a little bit like saying, the Batman talks about himself or something. Because all I do is I really just make up myself as I go. In a way, it's not really me talking about me, but it's me constructing me in a new and more interesting way than I really am. So it's not really me I'm talking about. Okay, and feedback number 5. Oh, Chris knows his stuff, but maybe he knows it too well. And so I've decided this time, through this lecture series, to know my stuff a little bit less well. I'm going to, what I decided to do was to work through a whole set of ideas that I want to chart, and I want you to chart, that are sort of at a very particular edge of architecture, of architectural theory, of philosophy. And it's an edge that we'll be negotiating together a little bit. Okay. That being said, what's sort of happening here is I'm thinking and thinking hard and working my way every week through a whole set of ideas and notions, and bringing to them here on a Wednesday afternoon, in a very fresh sort of manner. So I apologise when it's too fresh or too raw. And if anyone needs to or wants to correct me on any points, please do. Or please let me know where you're uncomfortable, or or where it's getting too exciting for you or something. Okay. You don't have to raise an arm. You can just raise. You can just rise. Okay. All right. The course. Today's lecture is going to be very a little bit banal, a little bit boring. I've got to run through what it is we're going to be doing across the semester, talk about what it is you're going to be doing and how you're going to be fixating, and then get into just a very short, very brief sort of example of a way of entering this sort of logic. Okay. And so, as it says in the sort of document, in Schizoanalytic Cartographies of 89, the psychoanalyst Felix Guattari suggests that the elements of schizoanalysis are, quote, like crystals of singularization, points of bifurcation outside of dominant coordinates, on the basis of which mutant universes of reference can spring up. The aim of this course is to give you an opportunity to engage with architecture's thoughts and selves in alternate ways, to experiment and explore. And that's what we'll be doing. And we'll do it in the dark. It's always much better that way, in a way, or better for me. Okay, or better for you, I'm sure. All right. And we'll get back to this sort of point. Okay. The aims of the course, the objective of the course is actually called Modern Architectural Theory, which is just because it's very difficult to change course titles at this university without going through a couple of years of bureaucratic rigmarole in a way. So it's a slightly dated sort of title, but it's designed to equip you with critical key understandings of Western architectural theories from the Enlightenment to the present. Emphasis is on those theories with contemporary traction, and by that I mean they have a very particular contemporary life in a way. I'm not going to tell you about Plato and Platonic forms and their value, largely because they have so little value today in a way. The interest and the areas in which I'll sort of fixate are those that have a very particular and edgy type of currency at the moment that's in architecture, but also in philosophy and cultural studies more broadly, and art more broadly. What I'll tend to do, I'll get back as far as about Marxism. So we'll touch and deal with Marx and Marxism. We'll also, we'll go back even a little bit further to Darwinism, okay, and evolutionary biology in some sense, but particular angles to do with that. We'll look at psychoanalysis. Okay, we'll follow it through to phenomenology and structuralism. Okay, so phenomenology, and see, as you know, I mean, if you know this all too well as well, just nod, and so I'll back away and just, and not do the explanation, or I'll explain it in more careful terms. All right. So what from phenomenology, dealing with the body and one's embodiment, okay, of the world. I embody the world embodies me. You all sort of know the discourse and the rhetoric. Okay, I understand the world through my body. Okay, you know that? I don't mean through mine, I mean through yours, through your own. Okay? And structuralism, dealing primarily with text, okay, and notions that come out of language and linguistics. Okay? And post-structuralism that rolls effectively structuralism and phenomenology together in sort of saying actually both are incredibly vital. You know, the languages with which we operate and with which we think, and the way in which we speak those languages, or the languages roll over my tongue. Okay, both important. Okay, I think that's it. I mentioned psychoanalysis as well, but okay. And that'll get us to this very particular moment where a whole lot of these theories and formulations are sort of banging together and trying to roll out a very particular discourse about what we are, how we operate, what the world is, you know, how we think the world. Okay. And that's what's meant by contemporary traction. And what it says there is also that emphasis will be placed on very particular usages and incarnations and emergences of these theories. Organised predominantly as a conceptual survey, there's 1,000 ways of working through some of this material, or all of this material. And all I can do over the course of one semester is effectively give you something like I don't know how to think about it, but it's a little bit like, you know, the red light district in Amsterdam, where you walk past all those windows in a way, and you get a sense of what's going on in each sort of, and so or the non-red light district of Amsterdam, and you walk past all those shops, and you get a sense of all that's sort of going on in all those windows and all that possibility. Okay, you sort of get a little bit of a taste for it in a way, but you don't always indulge, okay, or indulge deeply or deeply enough. So that's what we're going to do, is sort of like making our way sort of down that very particular row of streets along that bank, that canal. I don't know it personally, I'm just imagining what this is like. Google Earth, I Google Earthed it, you know, like you know, with a sense of what's possible within there. Okay. That being said, there will be particular moments of indulgence where you need to indulge, like indulge big time. And with your own work and what I'm asking you to do in terms of assessment for this course, it's going to involve you getting fairly heavily into something very particular. Okay. So you have to pick your fetish, you know, pick what it is where you want to go. Okay. And there'll be readings, lectures, tutorials, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Learning outcomes. So I need to take you through these. I apologize for that. This is also what you'll tend to be assessed on, okay, at the end, so keep it in mind. So applying a level of information literacy, it's going to be absolutely necessary. You're doing the master's, and any master's course involves a serious research component, and that serious research component is undertaken by you, not me. Okay, and what that means is that you need to start really managing information and spending time thinking and reading every week of the course. Okay. I'd be setting aside at least, I don't know, at least 5 bath times of the week to think and think carefully about the world. okay, and probably at least 5 or 6 hours a week of reading, like not in the bath, but otherwise, okay, investigating things, okay. It'll take a lot of time to develop up a very particular sensibility and for yourselves, okay. So it's an ongoing thing, it's a lifelong thing, but by the end of the semester, like you'll need to be producing something that bears all the marks of a decent amount of reading and a decent amount of bathing. Okay. 2, consider the challenge and elucidate complex ideas in clear and concise manners. Okay. Only when you're all going to be fixating on very particular sets of ideas, okay, that will be just yours to fixate upon. It's not necessarily going to be shared. And in order to do so, in order to articulate those ideas, which are often quite complex and have complex contexts, there's a couple of things you're going to need. And one is to have read a shitload, to be really on top of the material in order that you can then speak it in fairly clear ways and come to very particular personal senses of what that means and how that might operate. Okay, not just regurgitating the verbiage of philosopher X or philosopher Y. Okay, but knowing exactly what it is the concept means and how it seems to operate. It'll take a lot of indulgence on your part. You'll have to spend a lot of time sort of thinking it through, dealing with it. The other thing is, in order to get the context and understand something of the context, it's intended that you attend every lecture and almost every tutorial, okay? And the reason is you need to build a very particular context or have a sense of the broader context into which your ideas sit, okay? It's always very obvious at the end of the semester when essays are written, when work comes in, where there's no understanding of the broader context into which that theory or logic, is situated. Okay. The tutorials and hearing other people speak about what it is they're investigating and how they're investigating it, and those individual contexts of those concepts, and the lectures will help you to situate your own work. Okay. Ability to inform action through knowledge of architectural design theory with particular emphasis on specific cultural and philosophical contexts in which the theories arose and how they're represented in the domain of architecture. Okay. I suffer from a slight problem, and that is an architectural background and architectural training. And what that training and background tends to mean is that when I read philosophy and psychoanalysis or whatever it is, I'm always putting it in a certain architectural context and understanding it spatially, materially, and in ways that architects tend to. Okay? You will definitely need to sort of develop a fairly strong sense of what the architectural value of a whole set of these notions is or might be. I can promise you that there's not a concept that you can come across that has no spatial material, no architectural value or characteristic, okay? But developing up a way of talking about that and exploring that will take a little bit of time. And the fourth thing, an ability to think abstractly, conceptually, and critically about architecture and through different architectural and urban ideas, demonstrating principles that are of particular central theories with an understanding of relevant terms and references. Okay. Now, what this tends to imply is that not only that you can grab an idea in a way, but that you'll grab it critically and rigorously. Okay, these ideas are put out into the world in very particular frames with very particular contexts, and it's up to you to be careful and critical about those ideas. Okay, not just to take them as given, not to use them lightly in a way, because none of them will be particularly light. It's also incumbent upon you at this point in time in the Masters. How many of you have just started the Masters or this year? And how many of you, this is the second year, your second year? Okay, so about half. How many of you aren't involved in the course at all? No. That's just a check because they like to know that no one's getting that money for nothing, or nothing for money, I guess as the case may be. All right. So it's important at this point in the Masters that everything you do and everything you think about and everything you deal with is of value to you and the formation of yourselves as architects, okay, as thoughtful architects. Okay. It's very easy for you to go on at this point of time. If you're looking forward to a life working in some back office for some dud, McDonald's designer, pumping it out, then you probably don't need to turn up to courses like this, okay? But it's probably, if you don't want to be that, it's important that you think critically and carefully about what it is that you do, and that you develop languages and logics and systems of thinking that are alternate to the ways you've tended to come into architecture, alternate to the sort of preconceptions that you've entered the courses with, okay? If you want to operate at a very particular edge of architecture, you need to think at a very particular edge. Okay? And courses like this give you the ability, or give you at least the space and the time, to actually carve out some logics or think through some logics that are fascinating for you and that might help you develop yourselves and your careers, okay? And your architectures, all right? You don't have to sit in the front row if you don't want. Are you right there? Are you sure? You missed where I pointed out where the exits are, because now you're actually in charge of this one. All right? If lights flash, like if an orange light flashes here, that means there could be a fire and you have to go straight to the door as quick as possible, okay? All right, just noting. All right. So don't waste a second dealing with ideas or thoughts or logics or images or anything that is not that do not grab you in some way, okay? If they're not grabbing you, if they seem to have no basis in your world or no value in your current thinking, then lose them, okay? Walk away. At least walk away for now. Okay. There'll be 10 lectures, okay? And those 10 lectures will chart a very particular course. As I suggested, there's 1,000 different ways, 1,000 different routes through all of this philosophy and theory. It's like 1,000 different routes through Amsterdam or something. And what you need, and what I'll be doing is charting just one very particular route. Okay? And the route that I want to chart through this lecture series is a route that's related to, actually it's related to roots generally. It's related to sex and gender, and it's also particularly related to ideas of and erotics of architecture and notions of desire in architecture. All right? I can deal with Marx, I can deal with Freud, I can deal with Lacan, I can deal with all these figures in 1,000 different ways. I'm going to chart a very particular way in and through it, and it relates to a notion of desire and desiring. Okay? Just because that's what we tend to do and what we tend not to talk about and tend not to think about, okay, too often. The tutorials will run in 6 groups. So there'll be a 15A, 15B, 15C, which relates to 15 o'clock or something, like 3 o'clock. And then there'll be a 16A, 16B, and 16C, which relates to 1600 hours, okay? I'm not quite sure how this system works, but there's a timetabling system, and when you signed up, you're either allocated or you chose to be allocated into particular groups. Okay? Those groups are all noted on the last 3, I think, pages of the document. Today's tutorials are going to be very simple. They'll be like very simple meet and greets, like getting to know your tutor getting to know you, and then largely just talking about, well, tutorials are going to do 2 things along the way. They're going to deal with concepts and ideas that emerge in the lecture series, things that you're not sure about, things that you need to talk about, things that you don't know exactly how they're operating, or you just can't agree with and you need to voice your reaction to, okay, or you want to absolutely agree with and get a gold star or something, right? So they'll deal with the lecture content. They'll also deal with moving you along in assignment assessment terms, okay? And this is the key thing those tutorials will do, okay? So you'll be working through a set of assessments, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the tutorials and the tutors are there to help you get there in the end and to make it strong and rich, okay? Now, the tutors like myself, when it comes to you deciding which concepts and which ideas and which notions you want to fixate upon, the tutors won't be experts. Okay? They'll have their set of notions that they're used to working with. I'll have my set. In a way, you have to become your own little expert of your own little set of theoretical worlds. Okay? So, the way it will start is each student, everyone, is going to choose an individual image. Now, that image I've described as being of architecture, but my own personal definition of architecture is really incredibly broad. Okay, like I've suggested, I tend to see everything as architectural. Okay, so you're going to fixate upon an image to begin with. The tutorials will allow a broader survey of the field and comparisons between philosophical concepts and architecture, etc. Attendance is compulsory. At this point, later on in the semester, like within a few weeks, if you choose not to attend a tutorial, it tends to mean you don't need help with the assessment work that you're undertaking and moving through, and you're well on top of the concept and you feel like you don't need to talk too much about it for a particular week or two. That's fine. You know, it's fine to miss a week or two. Okay, try not to, but you know, like it is okay anyway. But at the moment, it's important that you discuss exactly where your work's going to go. So the first thing we're doing, and you're doing, is fixating on an image. And the reason is quite simple, and I'll explain it sort of a little bit in a second. Okay. Now the tutors there's three tutors. There's Harris and Maru. Do you know Harris? No? Yes? Put your hand up if you know Harris. Keep it up if you know him very well. Oh, some people are very slow taking it down. If you know him very well, you can move out of his group. It's fine. No, or you can stay there, or you can elect to stay there. And Maru? Like, do people know Maru? Yeah, some people know Maru. That's good. Okay. Okay. And the third tutor is like mystery number tutor. It's sort of like this is like one of those dating programs or something. That's so, partly because unfortunately the tutor number 3 pulled out at the very last moment. I'm not sure why. But today that'll be me. So if you're in group 15C or 16C. It'll be me in the studio. Okay. So all tutorials are in the studio. Assessments. All right. There'll be 3 key assessments for the subject. Okay. Assessment number 1 it's in 2 phases really. The first phase is effectively working towards experimenting, exploring with the architectures, with the images, with the ideas that you're dealing with or going to be dealing with. The second phase is really related to generating an essay. Okay. The first phase is effectively what's called abstract pecha kucha. In a way, what we want to work through, and this is due in 3 weeks, the 16th of August, okay? And there's sort of a lot to be done in those 3 weeks. I guess you know what pecha kucha is, which is like they just have this 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide, and you're going to be producing a PowerPoint which is in this format with embedded narration. Okay, and so it'll be like making your own like mini 6-minute 40 lecture. So everyone's to produce the PowerPoint presentation introducing their research. The aim of the assessment item is to get you up and running. Each student has to decide, first of all, upon an architectural image, which will form what Guattari calls the crystal of singularization. This is why people burn alive. The aim of the assessment item is to get you up and running in the essay process. Each student must firstly have decided upon an image, okay, about which everything will develop. In previous years, in third year history theory, what you end up doing is writing an essay, and it was probably pretty shitty. It was probably, I don't know, I don't know if you would be proud of it these days, but maybe you would, I don't know. But I was probably proud of it when I read it, okay? But what we're aiming to do is a much more consistent, coherent literary fragment at this point in time. We want something that's beautiful to read, that's engaging, that's tantalizing, that's that I could read in the bath on a Friday night. Maybe not Saturday, but Friday. Okay? And that's what we're working towards. To start that process, I want you to do something. It's incredibly simple, and it'll have to be done in the next week. And that is find an image, like just one. And it's a singular image that grabs you, that excites you, that disturbs you, that upsets you, that relates in some manner to the architectural. Okay, it could be an image of a building, it could be an image of an urban space, it could be an image of an installation, but something that absolutely grabs you. Okay, what I don't want you to do is to effectively say, oh, I really like Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, therefore I'm going to find an image of it. Okay, I don't want you dealing with an entire architecture this semester. What I want you dealing with is an image, okay? An image of that architecture and thinking through the image itself. One will relate to the other, of course, as content always relates to expression, okay? So I want brilliant images. I myself am taken at the moment by Polaroids because there's something quite fixed and fundamental about that sort of capture in a way. And they don't spread nearly as fast as digital images. They're sort of held in a very particular manner in a way, until, of course, someone takes a digital image of their Polaroid and puts it out there in the world, okay? But I want you to exhaust yourselves finding an image that is the image, the right image, the one image, okay? And we'll start there. Secondly, what you need to do in that Pecha Kucha, okay, is introduce the image, talk about the image, talk about the compulsion that directs you to that image, okay, and the particularities of that image. I'll run through what this may look like in a second, okay, and secondly, think about theoretical frames, philosophical frames that will allow you to think the image, okay? Okay, how do you think the image? How do you actually engage with the image? Okay. Now, in third year, we went through a very sort of similar process, except for most of you, you were told this is your theory or your concept that you're going to deal with, investigate it, know it, okay? In this sense, what you need to do is sorry, that's so distracting. I'll just stop when it goes and then see if it goes off. No, it's not going to work. It's probably not connected to anything that's recording. I don't know. But what you're going to do is grab hold of a conceptual framework that will allow you to engage with the image. Okay, and again, the logic here, it's not a simple task, and it's not an easy task. Okay, because there's millions and billions of theoretical frameworks and notions and concepts. I want you to use roughly the definition we used in third year, for those of you who did the course through third year, in keeping it very tight. Okay, you want a concept that you can assign to one philosopher or one theorist. You can name the concept, and you can describe its qualities and characteristics. Okay, if you can't name the concept, okay, it's probably not a concept. Okay. That being said, if you can talk about the sensibility or the sensation or the set of ideas that you want to work with, it's likely that your tutors can help you name the concept as well, or at least think of concepts that, are tangential or run some sort of line around the sensations you're dealing with or want to deal with. Okay, and you'll work through that in the abstract Pecha Kucha. Okay, is that vaguely okay? People vaguely know what's going on? Okay, you can talk more about it in the tutorials. What is not a concept? This is where I get into trouble all the time. So what is not a concept? A papal decree is not a concept. Okay, and I'm not laughing about Catholicism. It's just not a concept. Okay? A moral is not a concept. Right? And there's a whole set of logics that say what a concept is and what a concept isn't. Okay? A concept is small and tight and responsive and operative in various contingencies. Okay? It's not like a law of eternity or a truth. Okay? They're a very different characteristic and character. One is debatable, refutable, arguable, like contestable, like one you can actually pick up and play with and let be a tool for you. You know, Deleuze describes them as tools in a way. Foucault describes them as the toolbox. Okay, they can open doors for you and make you think about things in alternate manners. Okay, but be careful that it is a concept. Okay. So it's up to you to organise it into Petrarch format. Okay, with you know how to do slide transitions and things like that. I assume. Also, you embed audio. So what we'll get is 20 slides, 20 seconds each, with a well-refined, defined sort of narration over the top. Usually in your voice, except if your voice is like like how some, people, I shouldn't do that, like, how some people, because that's very rude. That was bad, Harris, bad. Make sure it's a good narration. Imagine, like, channel Stephen Fry. You want to tell it as Stephen Fry would tell it, okay? Okay, and you embed the narration, you make sure the narration, this PowerPoint just runs and rolls by itself, okay? Your tutor probably won't want to be clicking on things and trying to open up your voice or shut it down at various points, okay? All right, that's assessment item number 1, 3 weeks' time, okay? Assessment item number 2, we'll work through drafts of the essay, so one will emerge from the other. The abstract will introduce the image. It'll talk about the backgrounding of that image. It'll then sort of start playing between the image and a certain conceptual framework that you're investigating and exploring in order to articulate and speak of that image, okay? Assessment item number 2 is growing that abstract effectively, or 6-minute 40 abstract, toward an essay. Okay, it's formative. It won't be marked. Okay, it's optional in that sense. If you don't do it, so be it. But it would be a good idea to do it. Okay, and there's about a month after the abstract to do this, and then about a month after that, full essay, 3,200 words. Although 32 is sort of light on in a way, and we sort of say plus or minus 10%, but at this point it should rather, usually be more plus than minus, okay? Now, the essay, as I've suggested, is a refined piece of writing, something that will give pleasure to read, okay? If it's boring as shit, it'll be a problem, okay? Because what we're going to aim to do is get some really decently refined pieces of articulation out, okay? All right. So that's introduction to the course, what we're going to be doing, how it's going to be done. Is everyone okay with that? Any questions? Okay, all right. What I want to talk through, and it won't take long for me to do so, is how that investigation might go and what this sort of might look like. Before I do that, what I have to say is this image. When you're searching for this image, when we search for things, we're already. It's very hard to just. I wouldn't put the word image into Google Images and then look at everything that comes out because it'll take you far too long. But I think what I would be doing is thinking and fixating and at least giving one bath time, probably tonight, over to that question of what matters to you. Like, and why does it matter to you? Okay. Now, I think thought's not simple and thought's not easy, and it's necessary to absolutely dedicate time to it in a way. And when you ask that sort of question, what's important to you and what matters to you, and not even centering in on that question, but even narrowing it further, what matters most to you, you'll start unpicking very intense little things that will be very important for you to get to grips with. As I said earlier, I wouldn't waste a second sort of dealing with things that I'm not interested in or that I don't feel compelled by, in a way. Like, you know, if I was sitting in the audience right now and I was really compelled, like in love with the guy next to me, I would talk to them, not listen to me, for example, right? That's what I would do, in a way. Because don't waste a second dealing with things that do not matter or that are secondary. Okay? Like, it's of no use. And every course, every architecture course, every studio that you do is an opportunity for you to fixate upon something that you're intensely interested in. Okay? To chart something like love or passion or joy. Okay? Or hate or fear or something like that really grabs you. Okay? So, when you're looking for that image, you'll already be looking for something particular that relates to something that's complex for you or difficult for you or that you want to work through. Okay? I, on a weekly basis, sort of do the same. When the student feedback came and someone said they think I know my stuff too much or something like that, I sort of took it as a challenge to, across the next 12 weeks, to work through stuff I don't know. Okay, and in way I offer this as an apology, right? But it'll be intensely fresh for that sort of reason, okay? And fresh for me, and likely sort of fresh for you as well, I imagine, okay? And that's sort of what we're going to do. So everyone understands what they're doing with the image, what they're looking for, okay? And it's not an image of something, it's an image in and of itself, okay? What I did this week was, and it's a hard thing to do because I know that once it happens, once I find an image that I'm intensely in love with or feel completely drawn towards, I'll fixate. And that can be sort of problematic in a way. And in a few weeks' time, we'll talk about fetishes and fetishized items and architecture as fetish. And I think this is always the risk as well, that we fetishize. You know, we just talk to that boy next to us, you know, that we love, rather than you know, listening to the rest of the world. That's what's called fetishization. Okay. All right. So, quick introduction. This is the sort of thing you'll be doing in your Pecha Kucha. I must admit, I tried to do it as a Pecha Kucha to begin with, but I tend to talk too much and think and write too much, and so it's likely going to run to more like 6 minutes 40 seconds per slide than 20 seconds. Okay. Every now and again, we are struck by an image. We're struck in the sense that the image moves us. It moves us in sensation terms. It's not sensible, but in terms of sensation. Okay. And sensation, as William James, the proto-psychologist, and Alfred North Whitehead, the mathematician-philosopher, suggest, and then that Gilles Deleuze, the philosopher, takes up, sensation always precedes the sensible. Okay. So in the sort of logic that emerges from people like William James, who I assume we've talked about before, proto-psychologist William James came up famously at the turn of last century with the James Lang theory of affect. We talked about this, haven't we? Like where emotion comes from. Yeah. I've told the bear story, haven't I? Have you heard the bear story? All right, I'll retell the bear story very quickly. Okay. Sensation, the idea is sensation precedes the sensible. Now what that means is that sensation, the thing that sort of grounds us, is first and foremost. Okay. William James is an American proto-psychologist, early psychologist. His brother was Henry James, the British author. Anyway, they were sort of born on different different sides of the Atlantic. But William James noticed, right, that the way we tend to talk about the world and our engagements with it goes a certain way. And the story goes something like, I'm walking through the forest. Like, I can't do it so well. This is like how people walk through forests. They could have those like walking things, like walking sticks. You're walking through the forest. Bear jumps out. Holy fuck. I can say that because I'm away from the speaker. You feel fear, right? And then you run. Right? Now that's the way we tend to think of the world. We tend also to think of our architectural engagements in exactly this way. You know, walking through the village, you know, like when I see Villa Savoie, oh, that's lovely. And then I go towards it and love it, right? Now, it's not the way. William James sort of makes the point that this is not what happens. What happens is, I'm walking through the forest, bear jumps out, I run, and think, holy fuck. Okay? The running precedes the construction of the emotion. Emotion as a construction is secondary to affect, which is that thing that absolutely takes your body away. Okay? Now, if you ever doubt it, and unfortunately so much of our logic and so much of our culture is sort of built around a certain idea that there's a thought and then a sensation that relates to that thought. Or there's an emotion as a thought, sadness, happiness, joy, and then a sensation. When you're in the bar, or the bath, but it's probably the bar. When you're in a bar and you see a guy, right, and he's shit hot, right, and you see him I'm not pointing to you, I'm just like, it's just my hands in that direction. I'll just move around so it's random, all right? When you're in the bar, see a guy, shit hot. What happens is, right, pupils dilate, a little bit of sweat, it's sort of like prickling on the back of the neck, you know, a little bit of warmth in the genitalia, right, just a little, right? And then I feel love and drawn to that, okay? First affect, first sensation, then reaction, okay? And this is what I want you to engage with in your images. I don't care, I don't give a fuck about the story behind it. I don't want to know about it was done by, blah, blah, in the blah, blah year, and it's so important, for the history of art. I don't give a shit. I want affect, okay? And I want you to sort of deal with that which is affecting, right? The value of this theory is massive, 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 massive in terms of architecture, of course. Because all of those logics that you've been taught up till now to do with we construct meaning and we use symbols and symbolism and what does it mean, when you stand up and you say my building is a boat or something, like that's really stupid logic, really stupid thinking. What matters first and foremost is sensation, okay? Affect. And affect relates not to what something means and the construction of meaning, but what something does and what it does to your body. Okay? An affect is struck, a line of flight taken. We know this feeling, it's like love. Okay? And you've all, I assume, I hope, that you've all been struck by love. Right? Like, yeah? Right. I just hope it's not just me, because that would be really shitty. Lecture series over. You're drawn into their world. You're fleeing oneself. You're fleeing oneself in order to depart with them. Okay. And it's at these moments we're not sort of dealing with, oh, how am I and who am I? Right? We're not controlling the dilation of the pupils or the flaring of the nostrils. Okay. At all. What's happening is actually we're swept away by it, okay, and in relationship with it, okay. You're already with them in a sense. You're already leaving the bar, okay, and that's the sense and the sensation. You've lost yourself in their movement and swept with them. We find ourselves whisked away by images such as this, or at least I do, or I am. The dominant language here is the language of rockets, of flight, of departure lounges, of escape. It's a tradition that starts with Merleau-Ponty, the phenomenologist, when, in an unfinished essay in his last unfinished book, he describes the sensation of one hand touching another. He would suggest that the sense of one hand touching another, quote, traverses space as a rocket in order to discover the exterior object in its place, end quote. Okay. So Merleau-Ponty sort of starts noticing, and Merleau-Ponty is a phenomenologist, so for him, he was responsible for giving us a whole lot of discourse to do with the way in which we understand and engage with the world. And that discourse, and the discourse of phenomenology, which is very dominant in architecture and architectural thinking, is effectively a discourse that says, I feel something, therefore it is. I sense things, and my body swallows it in. My eyesight grabs it. My hearing, my touch, and therefore, I now have it, and that's how I understand the world, okay, and engage with the world. Right? It sounds all fine. It sounds all like entirely reasonable, right? Because you only know what you know, right? You only feel what you feel. You only see what you see, right? And that's sort of the limit. Okay. The problem with the discourse is that it becomes entirely self-referential. It builds up a sense of the self as very important, because you're the filter of the world, right? What it does is politically it devalues that which is outside or beyond you. Okay? Oh, I only know what's going on in Syria via the television, and it's not really touching me, it's not really real, I don't feel it on my skin, therefore it doesn't matter. Okay, that's the discourse of phenomenology and the politics of phenomenology. Okay, we can devalue the outside because its reality is one step removed from the reality of the flesh. Okay, that's the danger of phenomenology in like two sentences. Okay, now Merleau-Ponty towards the end of his career starts getting interested in a whole lot of things that are actually beyond us, what he calls the invisible. Okay? And in a text, The Visible and the Invisible, he starts looking at moments where things actually have their own life beyond us. He talks about one hand touching another and quote, where the hand that touches, quote, traverses space as a rocket in order to discover the exterior object in its place. Okay? A life beyond that which we have and which we hold and that which we understand, okay, in its place. The exterior object, the subject of this sensation, if sensation has a subject at all, generates its own place, its place. That is to say that it doesn't occupy our frame of reference. It pays little to no respect to spectatorship and observation. The lovers on this bed, on that bed, are firstly almost entirely, I think, in their own place. Okay? Secondly, in Lucian Freud's place, and only come to occupy our place because Bruce Bernard takes the photograph, evoking what Roland Barthes calls the second sight of the photographer that is, quote, unconcerned with his subject, end quote. The thing that compels me to this very particular sort of image is that I'm not a spectator in it, I'm actually less than a spectator here. Because in this sort of image, what happens is, what seems to be going on is something like they're completely unaware of the photographer's presence. They don't give a shit, in a way, and he's just sort of run with the moment. Okay. In fact, he's barely a photographer, Bruce Bernard. Okay. This is a room. This is Lucian Freud's painting studio. Okay. And what we get sort of in an image like this is a sort of sense that I am removed from that space and have nothing to do with it. It is something in and of itself. Proust deals with a very particular moment like this in his long novels of remembrance. And it's this moment where he describes his character sort of entering his grandmother's study. And I don't know if you've had this moment, but I think they're fairly rare in life. But I had it once, right? So I don't know it absolutely well. You might have had it multiple times, okay? Let me go on. I entered the space. I'll tell the story via Proust, and then I'll tell it via me, but it's not really me, so don't complain about me talking about myself, okay? Proust's character enters a space, and it's his grandmother's study. Okay, and she's in a corner, and she's reading, and she's engaged in something, like in the material that she's reading, and she doesn't notice him entering. Right? And he then has the sense that this is almost like a photographic type of image, in that there's no respect paid to me as a subject at all. I'm not here. Okay? And this is someone who would normally, beam with joy and pleasure at seeing them, at this sort of thing, and he has this strange sense of, I'm not here. Anyway, okay. I'm not even a spectator to this situation because there's no acknowledgement at all. I don't know if you've sort of had that sense, but I had it once when I think I was about 12, or someone vague was about 12, and I was meant to have gone to bed at my grandmother's house, and I heard something going on at the front of the house, in a way, and so I sort of hop out of bed and I march through the house, in a way. My grandmother is deaf. She has hearing aids. She hardly hears anything at all. My grandfather, my late grandfather, used to be blind as well, so living there was always fascinating because you could get away with so much depending on who was there, in a way. You had to be really quiet around one of them and really not visible around the other, in a way. But my grandmother was in the front of the house, and I heard this banging and things like that. I go down, and in the crack of the door into the kitchen, in a way, I could sort of see through just the crack, and she's putting things in the pantry, in a way, but it's not her. Okay? And the reason it's not her is because she doesn't know I'm there, and there's absolutely no acknowledgement of me, in a way. And it's a very disturbing experience, like if you've had anything like this, because those people that you're absolutely closest to, we know them only in acknowledging of ourselves, in a way, and our acknowledgements. It's a very different thing when they're not acknowledging, okay? And I get this sort of sense in this sort of image, not necessarily that the photographer or me as the spectator is intrusive, but that I'm not even there. Okay. This language, and what I'm talking about here is this sort of language of flight that such an image takes us on, is also the language that the psychoanalyst Felix Guattari evokes to describe the elements of what he calls schizoanalysis. Okay, and I mentioned this at the very start of the lecture. The parties or particles or elements of schizoanalysis are those elements that might sweep us away. Guattari is a psychoanalyst. He suggests that these elements, quote, are like crystals of singularization, points of bifurcation outside the dominant coordinates on the basis of which mutant universes of reference can spring up, end quote. I'll unpick these terms in a minute, okay. Schizoanalysis arrives out of the conjunction of structuralism and phenomenology and with the lingering residue of something like psychoanalysis. Okay? Schizoanalysis sort of says that almost everything can be arranged and rearranged depending on our perspective. Okay? Now, it sounds odd or weird or something like that, but there's no need to sort of doubt it. You only have to look at sort of history to find whole rearrangements of society and structures and families and values and ourselves, okay, based on what was believed and what was understood and what was felt at the time. Okay? Things that are considered madness today weren't necessarily considered madness 50 or 100 years ago. Like things that are considered problematic today and very horrible and difficult and complex weren't considered that 50 years ago. Okay? Things that we imprison people for today, you know, were very different to the things that they were imprisoned, you know, like for pre-9/11. Okay? All of our logic shift and change all the time. Okay? Now, what Guattari notes is that someone like he's sort of dealing with the clinical version of schizophrenia. Okay? Guattari works as a psychoanalyst. He works at Labor, the clinic, the French clinic, the famous French clinic, where they do a lot of work on group work, where they effectively have the so-called patients, never described as patients, but running the place and organising the place, because what they're suggesting is that there's an alternate logic going on that needs to be countenanced rather than reduced to the norm of our logic, okay, or reduced to the norms of contemporary psychoanalysis or psychology. All right? Now, and again, it sounds like it could be problematic, and it likely is in some ways, in a way. And we should probably differentiate the clinical version of schizophrenia from schizoanalysis. However, where they do come together is in something like a logic of, you know how someone suffering a schizo episode might think the television's talking to them, right? That's fairly common, yeah? The reason is, it is, right? So is yours, okay? It's talking directly to you. Okay, that's the reality. Sometimes that which is cast as sort of like mental illness is probably closer to a certain reality than we like to imagine. Someone suffering from depression, major depression, are they more likely or less likely to accurately predict the outcome of events? The answer is they're more likely to accurately predict the outcome of any event. Okay? So we classify it as depression. However, their ability to predict their likely outcome of events is so much closer to reality. Okay? The schizo collecting of elements and seeing everything as configuring and in relation, okay, is because those elements, as bizarre as they are and as often not connected as they are in relation. Okay? It's just not the relation we normally tend to associate them with. Okay? And we all have this tendency as well. So, I'm sure that, and maybe more as a teenager than now, but I'm sure that if it's dark and cloudy outside and rainy, right, you can't help but think it's about you. At least in some manner, in some way, yeah? Maybe not. But a lot of us do, you know, and you can't help it, okay? There's a certain composing of the earth and the world and forces that sort of go on. Okay? Guattari suggests that these elements of schizoanalysis, which are like points of fixation, okay? So what he's interested in is not the dominant logic that overrides things, but the actual pinpointing of a fixation, okay? They are, and I'll quote again, crystals of singularization, points of bifurcation outside of dominant coordinates on the basis of which mutant universes can spring up. And this is what your images will be to your essays and to your own work. Okay? When Guattari speaks of crystals of singularization, he's referring to a couple of things. A singularity is best thought of as a point of intensity that cannot be further reduced. Okay? The notion of singularity comes from the mathematician Poincaré. Okay? And Poincaré did all that work on the way in which curves work. Okay? And we measure inflection, etc. Okay? And what Poincaré notes is that, you know, when those curves go like that, like a more S sort of form, yeah? What Poincaré notes is that point of inflection, which is the point at which one curve sort of translates into another, is independent of the mathematics of either curve. Okay? There's nothing that defines that point in terms of this curve or that curve that makes it special. Okay? And yet it becomes the point of inflection about which other things move. Okay? Another way of thinking about singularization is to think of this notion of bifurcation. Okay, so a point of bifurcation is the point of turn, okay, where something that is something becomes something else. Okay, and it happens all the time and in every way possible. Charles Jenks's landscape work that he did all around the world, but in, say, the Scottish National Museum landscape, what he does is he piles up the earth, and he piles it up, and he piles it up, and he piles it up, and then at a very particular moment, instead of that earth continuing to pile, it fractures and moves down and creates a very particular, strangely, intensely beautiful form. Okay? And that's because it's the point of bifurcation, the point at which this system rolls into that system. Okay? Our culture is full of looking and fixations with these points of bifurcation, particularly when it comes to wars and things like that. You know, they want to mark the moment. You know, what was the moment when the first, you know, or the second Iraq War ends? Okay, and it's that moment where they have those tanks in Baghdad and they're pulling down the big statue of Saddam Hussein, right? Broadcast everywhere in every newspaper all over the planet. Every front page, every first radio exposition, etc. Okay, and it's because they want this to be the point of swinging. Okay, it's a very particular moment, a point of bifurcation. Now, the system that generated these situations in the first place has nothing to do with the resultant what happens after the bifurcation. Okay. It's a lot like sexuality and sexual pleasure, of course. It's a similar sort of thing. A lot of people cry after sex. Not me. Well, it's not even the me I'm pretending to be. Right? It's just out of character for the character I'm creating. Right? But it's quite normal. You know, these guys are talking about it right now. You know, it's like one of them has a tear in his eye. But effectively, what that is that point of bifurcation, in which case the status and the qualities that are actually built and established swing into something else. Okay? That's a singularity, that point of change, that point of transformation. It's a transformation that is in and of itself. It's a measure of difference, and it's not difference to or from, but difference in and of itself. And when we say that, what we're doing is we're making a very particular point. Aristotelian logic that we sort of get from Aristotle, you know, like in the Greeks invented philosophy, or so the Greeks tell us today. And effectively, when Aristotle says difference is always difference to and from. Okay, we measure. I can actually say that because I have Greek family. Okay, they're not Catholics, but I also have Catholic friends. Okay. So difference is to and from. We measure the difference between anything from something else. Okay, so we measure what woman is in terms of man, for example. Okay, and that's Aristotelian difference. But what we're talking about here in terms of this idea of singularity is where the difference cannot be measured to or from something else, but only in and of itself. Okay, it's like a quality, like red. Okay. The word crystal implies growth, a seed of something to come. Deleuze would refer to such things as he would use the term germinal and talk about germinal forces. Okay. When Guattari speaks of something being outside dominant coordinates, what does he mean? When I came to find this image, to see this image, I would, after some time of being lost in the image and with the image, search for information about the image. Okay. You will do a similar thing. What I want, first and foremost, you go with sensation. What draws you and drives you in that image, okay? And then secondly, what you'll likely do is you'll start finding out what can be called information about the image, okay? And this is what Guattari means by dominant coordinates, okay? They're the usual or standard frames of reference we use and bring to everything, okay? There's no problem with these usual and standard frames of reference, okay? The usual classifications, the usual sort of qualifications that we make on anything, okay? If you think of architecture, the usual things are the type of things that are in briefs, the type of things you do at a site analysis. You look for the sun, and you look for the angle of the land, and you sort of chart all these things in usual sort of ways. Okay? There's nothing wrong with these at all, other than you have to always remember they are just the dominant frames of reference. That's it. The dominant coordinates at this point in time. Okay? Definitely not the only coordinates. Definitely will not always be the way we measure these things. But they're a passing system of logic, okay, in which we indulge in the moment. Okay. There were things I already knew about this image, and you'll be the same. You'll be looking for certain things, okay? Things implicated in the very nature of the search. I was looking for images of Lucian Freud's work. And Lucian Freud, those who don't know, the 20th and only recently died British painter, perhaps the best painter of the 20th century, only to be compared, I guess, in that sort of term with someone like Francis Bacon. I've always loved Bacon's work. I've always been driven by Bacon's work in a way, and I had a friend who said, they prefer Lucian Freud, and I thought that was just conservative, like boring as shit, because like a upper middle class sort of, Lucian Freud had painted the Queen, he'd also painted, of course, Kate Moss. You know that? You know Lucian Freud? And so he painted Kate Moss. Indeed, he tattooed her ass, which is like a dream we've all had. Okay? And he was something like 89 at the time, which is also a dream, but a bad one. Lucian Freud, as this sort of character, I never liked the work. I didn't want to see the work because it was too real for me, or something like that. It looked like realism, where we try and capture the world as real as we can, in a way. Whereas Bacon was interested in a real that's sort of beyond the image. Okay. But when I first saw a Lucian Freud work in a gallery, that all changed massively, because the work, despite it looking real or something like that, it's almost constructed like a carpet of paint. It's like a very bizarre, intense type of construction of cells. Okay? So I was already looking for something of Lucian Freud. Okay? And you'll already be prospecting for something particular as well, or something that grabs you, or that you're interested in, or that you think is important. Okay? Because otherwise you're just Googling the word image or something, which would be odd. After a few years of finding myself full of his friend Francis Bacon's work, I've recently become entranced by Lucian's realism, his complex, deep real. His flesh and the deep interiors he finds on every surface. The dominant coordinates include the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where this photograph is located. That's a dominant coordinate, okay? It's fixed in space in Gallery 100, 2016-17, museum numbers E1415, 1416, 1417-2001. The numbers relate to the fact that there are 3 images that sit like a set in an odd triptych to which this one belongs. The dominant coordinates include the title as printed, and the title reads, quote, Leigh Bowery and Nicola Bateman posing for and the husband by Lucian Freud circa 1990. Okay? Words like husband belong to the world of dominant coordinates. It's a classification that is meant to control and denote a particular set of behaviours, objectives and fixations. I don't know how many of you are married, but I'm sorry to hear it. This is a husband. You see the husband, right? This is a husband. One assumes the woman named Nicola Bateman is a wife. But Freud's title, "and the husband," is beautifully ambiguous. All dominant coordinates have a tendency to leak. And the husband. Normally the word "and" implies connection, this and that, this and this and this. Okay. Once you've located your image, right, and you've found it entirely on sensation terms, right, you then start researching it and getting to grips with the dominant coordinates that are used to fix it in space and time, okay, or in virtual space and time. And when you start thinking and documenting all of these coordinates, what you'll tend to find is that there's always points of slippage in the coordinate itself, or always implied manifestos, or a type of politics inscribed in the fixing, in the coordinate, in the coordination of that image, okay? The photo is dated 1990. The painting that Freud was doing at the time, and you sort of just see that the edge of the painting in the image, right, in the photograph, was to be dated 1993. Both are fixed in time. And the surname first of the photographer, Bernard Bruce, born 1928, died 2000, also places him in time, or at least a time zone. The image, like all images catalogued at the V&A, has what they call a physical description. So every image sort of catalogued at the Victoria and Albert Museum sort of comes with a set description that I don't know who writes them, but they're probably not they're probably the opposite of like the person who writes the Dulux paint colour schedule. The physical description of this image is, quote, C-type colour photograph of two nude models on a bed, echoed by a painting of them on an easel, end quote. The word echo strikes me as odd. It's rich in what attempts to be a bland description, or the blandest of descriptions. The photographic image is 322 millimetres high, okay, 486 millimetres wide, and the sheet itself, we are told, is 405 millimetres high and 506 millimetres wide, which gives it a margin of white. More margin at the top and bottom than at the sides. The reference to C-type is also a dominant coordinate, a categorization aimed at stabilizing the process by which an image might be made into a photograph. Processes and papers and the means by which it is developed. A C-print, it turns out, is, quote, the traditional way of printing using negatives or slides and enlarger and photographic paper through a process of exposure and emulsive chemical layers, end quote. The word exposure in the description is much like the word echo, an opening to more than a dominant coordinate. And you can do this when you locate your image. Look for the lines of slippage in the dominant coordinates that allude to actually something beyond. Okay? If I wanted to, in this sort of image and this type of analysis and this type of thinking, to depart sort of from that sort of physical description, you know, it's words like echo and ideas of exposure that would likely drive my philosophical sort of investigation. Okay? It is not the dominant coordinates that concern Guattari, however. He describes the element of schizoanalysis as like crystals of singularization, points of bifurcation outside of dominant coordinates. So it's outside of that, okay? On the basis of which mutant universes of reference can spring up, end quote. It is the mutant universes of reference that are of concern to the psychoanalyst. The suggestion is that the image generates its own world, not a world framed in the manner by which we have tended to frame worlds. not a world written in the languages of classification and organization, but in its own terms. New terms, fresh terms, these terms germinate in the intensity, the immediacy, the unmediated intensity of the sensation. A language, a style, a word that rises, that springs up only via sensation. This world is the world of theory, the world of philosophy, of literature, and of architecture at its best. Okay. And by this I mean the arts are concerned with affect, with what the body does, by what constructs bodies, by new worlds and new populations. So at this moment in your lives, you're sort of faced with a certain sensibility or choice, and the choice is something like your architecture can just deal with the way the world is, right? The habits that are already around you and the languages and the sort of value systems and frames of reference that, are dominant, okay, at this point. Your architecture can sort of just fit into the office in which you're working part-time. Your architecture can stylistically and linguistically just meld with what seems like popular at the moment, okay? Or you have the choice of letting it establish its own frames of reference, okay? Letting narratives be written about it rather than putting it into habitual narratives. Okay? It will get to a point, a piquant moment, when the dominant coordinates of the brief, the traditional ways of reading a site, the logics of habit, the preconceptions,